Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever looked back on a season of your life and wondered, was all of that just wasted? The lost time, the broken plans, the prayers that seem to disappear into silence. It can feel like entire years vanished without meaning. But what if I told you that not a single moment was beyond the reach of God's hand? What if the very years you mourn are the ones He's getting ready to restore, not just to return, but to redeem in a way you never expected? What we see as wasted time is still within God's redemptive reach. Time is a servant of eternity. This is not just a hopeful sentiment, but a profound spiritual reality. The human experience is bound by time. We measure our worth, our progress, and even our identity through clocks and calendars. We divide life into seasons: childhood, youth, maturity, and the so-called twilight years. And when something doesn't go as planned, when years are lost to mistakes, addiction, apathy, grief, or waiting, we feel as though we have fallen behind some invisible schedule, as though our life is a race we have already lost. But such thinking is rooted in a temporal illusion, not in the eternal wisdom of God. In the divine economy, time behaves differently. To God, 1,000 years are like a day, and a day is like 1,000 years. This isn't poetic exaggeration, it is a clue to how limited our view of time really is. We tend to see life as a straight line: start, middle, end. We think in terms of cause and effect, of success following effort, and reward following obedience. And when this pattern is disrupted, we assume the story is broken. But God does not write in straight lines. His hand weaves, loops, circles back, and writes redemption into chapters that feel like ruin. When a person feels they have wasted their life or a part of it, it often comes from the pain of comparison. We see others advancing, flourishing, moving forward. We see milestones being achieved: marriages, careers, children, accomplishments, while we remain stuck in a chapter that seems meaningless. But the tragedy is not in the delay itself. It is in the lie we begin to believe, that the delay has erased our purpose. This is false. Time does not carry the authority to erase purpose. Only we give it that power when we forget that God stands outside of time and works within it, like an artist restoring a stained canvas. It is a strange but liberating truth that God is never in a hurry. He moves with infinite patience, which is not the same as slowness. His patience is purposeful. It is the patience of a gardener waiting for the roots to deepen before the first bloom. It is the patience of a composer writing a symphony that no one will hear until the final movement comes to life. And so, even the years you call wasted, the years you ran, rebelled, or simply sat paralyzed in fear, have been seen by Him, not with scorn but with compassion, not with dismissal but with intent. He sees not just where you were, but where that road can still lead if you let Him take the pen again. We forget that even our regrets are known by God before we make them. And yet, He still chooses to walk with us, to dwell in our story, to redeem our missteps. Redemption is not the erasure of the past, it is the transformation of it. God does not pretend your mistakes didn't happen. He turns them into soil for new growth. What you see as years the locusts have eaten, He sees as years that prepared the ground for a deeper harvest. God's restoration is not limited by your age, your record, or the ticking of the world's clock. Abraham received his promise when he was far too old. Moses began his true calling after 40 years in the wilderness. Ruth found her purpose in a foreign land after personal loss. These are not just stories, they are divine patterns. Time is only wasted if we assume it is ours to control. But once we surrender it back to the one who made time, it becomes something pliable, purposeful, and sacred. You may not be able to see how the pieces fit. That's all right. Restoration isn't always visible at first. It may begin in silence, in small acts of obedience, in moments of courage. But never believe the lie that any part of your life is beyond restoration. Time is not your master. It is God's servant, and in His hands, even the lost years can bear fruit. Suffering is a mystery that has haunted human hearts for as long as we've existed. It arrives uninvited and lingers longer than welcome. It wears many faces: grief, disappointment, failure, illness, silence, heartbreak. And yet, in the strange economy of heaven, suffering is not wasted. It is not arbitrary, nor is it empty. While it may not be fully understood in the moment, it carries within it a depth of meaning that only eternity will completely reveal. Suffering in the hands of God becomes a tool of refinement, a chisel shaping the soul into something that comfort could never craft. When we suffer, our instincts often cry out for relief, not revelation. We want an exit, not an explanation. But there are dimensions of the human heart, layers of faith, and depths of character that simply cannot be formed in ease. Fire is not gentle, but it purifies. Pressure is not pleasant, but it forms diamonds. There are truths about God, about love, about eternity, that we only come to grasp when all other things are stripped away. It is in the silence of unanswered prayers that we discover whether we love God or only His gifts. It is in the loss of control that we learn trust, not the shallow trust of religious language, but the raw, aching kind that says, even if I don't understand, I will still follow. Some imagine that if God truly loved them, He would shield them from pain. But this is a misunderstanding of love. True love does not always rescue us from difficulty, it walks with us through it. The cross stands as the ultimate evidence of this truth. God Himself chose suffering, not for the sake of spectacle, but for the sake of redemption. He stepped into human frailty, felt hunger, betrayal, abandonment. He did not watch suffering from afar. He entered it fully. And in doing so, He declared that suffering is not a mark of divine absence, but a place where grace becomes most visible. Often the fruit of suffering is not immediate. It takes time. And that delay is perhaps the hardest part. We want meaning now. We want closure, clarity, some visible return on our pain. But God's purposes stretch far beyond the horizon we can see. What appears to be a barren season may be one of deep rooting. There is work being done in the dark, beneath the surface. Seeds do not sprout in the sunlight alone. They require burial, hiddenness, and waiting. Likewise, there are parts of you that grow best when all seems lost. Pain also humbles us. It dismantles our illusions of control and independence. It reveals how much we need others, how much we need grace. It calls forth compassion in us, for once we've suffered, we see others differently. We stop judging as quickly. We become gentler, more patient, more present. Suffering, when allowed to do its work, enlarges the heart. It creates room for mercy, both received and given. Yet not all suffering is the same. Some of it comes from our own choices. Some of it is inflicted unjustly. Still, God is capable of weaving it all into something redemptive. He does not endorse evil, but He transforms its consequences. He is not the source of the storm, but He uses the wind to shape the tree. Even what the enemy intends for harm, God can turn into a story of grace. This doesn't always look miraculous. Often it's quiet, a shift in character, a change in direction, a deeper sensitivity to the Spirit. There is a strange peace that can emerge from prolonged suffering, not the peace of comfort, but the peace of surrender. You stop striving to control the outcome. You begin to rest in the knowledge that your life, though bruised and bleeding, is still in the hands of a good God. And that shift, though subtle, changes everything. You no longer measure your worth by success or progress, but by your belonging to the one who endured suffering before you. Suffering is not a detour from the spiritual path. It is very often the path itself. It does not mean you've been forgotten. On the contrary, it may mean that you are being prepared for something deeper. Your soul is being enlarged. Your roots are growing down before you grow up. And though it wounds, it also awakens. For in suffering, you come to know God not only as Creator or Judge, but as Comforter, Companion, and Redeemer. Restoration often begins in ways that escape the notice of the hurried heart. We expect divine intervention to come with fanfare, with unmistakable signs, loud proclamations, and instant transformation. We imagine heaven moving like a storm, sudden and impossible to miss. But more often restoration arrives the way morning does, not with a crash, but with light slowly leaking into a dark room. It begins in silence. It begins in stillness. It begins when no one is looking. The human spirit longs for resolution, especially after seasons of loss, failure, or waiting. When we think of God restoring what was lost, we often picture the grand reversal, broken things made whole in a moment, missing years returned all at once, joy erupting where sorrow once stood. And though God is indeed capable of such sudden miracles, he often chooses a quieter path, a path that unfolds gradually, like the growth of a tree or the healing of a wound. This slower, quieter work is no less divine. In fact, it is often more intimate, more thorough, and more lasting. Restoration does not always begin with visible change. It might begin with a shift in your thoughts, a softening of your heart, a sudden moment of clarity in the middle of a very ordinary day. It could come as a sense of peace in a place that once only stirred anxiety. It might be the courage to forgive someone, or the ability to rest without guilt. These things may seem small, but they are not. They are the first movements of redemption, the early rains before the harvest. They are God's fingerprints on your soul, rearranging you from the inside out. The reason many people miss the beginning of restoration is because it often does not look like restoration at all. It looks like quietness. It looks like repetition. It looks like nothing is happening. But what we forget is that God does not need a stage to work. He prefers the inner room, the secret place, the soil where no one sees the roots spreading. Restoration is a spiritual work first. It is internal before it is external. The visible fruit comes only after invisible growth has taken place. Part of our struggle is that we are addicted to speed. We are conditioned to expect results immediately. We measure healing by how quickly it comes and judge progress by how visible it is. But God is not bound by our tempo. His work is eternal, and so he moves with the patience of one who knows that time is merely a canvas, not a master. When God begins to restore something, he begins at the foundation. And that often means starting in the dark, in the silence, beneath the surface of our circumstances. There is also a sacred kindness in this quiet beginning. If restoration came loudly, it might overwhelm us. If all the brokenness was suddenly reversed, we might not be ready to receive it. There are wounds we've carried so long that healing must come gently. There are lies we've believed so deeply that truth must come softly, repeatedly, over time. God does not rush this process. He enters gently, not because he is weak, but because he is wise. He knows that to truly restore, he must do more than fix, he must transform. And transformation is rarely loud. It is important to recognize that the first signs of restoration are not always outward changes, but inward strength. The ability to hope again after despair is a miracle. The willingness to try again, to trust again, to pray again, these are quiet signs that the soul is coming back to life. When God restores, he is not just changing your situation, he is reviving your heart. He is bringing back color where there was only gray. He is rebuilding the inner sanctuary, stone by stone, word by word, moment by moment. We often think the waiting season is void of movement, but restoration frequently begins in the waiting itself. It is during those long, silent nights that God plants the seeds of renewal. We may not feel it, and we may not understand it, but something holy is happening. We are being prepared for what we cannot yet carry. We are being healed in places we didn't know were wounded. We are being strengthened for promises we don't yet see. And so, though the beginning may seem too quiet to matter, it does matter. It matters deeply, for what starts quietly with God never ends that way. What begins in secret will one day shout with joy. But first it must begin. Quietly. Faithfully. Silently. Preparation is not always an obvious act. In a world that demands immediate results and instant gratification, The idea of preparing for something unseen feels almost foolish. Why set the table if no guest is expected? Why build an ark if there are no clouds in the sky? Yet this is exactly what faith requires, a belief so rooted in the promise of God that you begin to act as if the fulfillment is already underway. Preparation is not merely practical readiness, it is spiritual alignment. It is a silent declaration that you trust the one who made the promise, even when nothing around you suggests it will come to pass. There is something profoundly powerful in living as though the restoration is already happening. Not because you are pretending, and not because you are trying to force God's hand, but because you are choosing to live according to a reality that is larger than your current circumstances. Faith is not passive. It doesn't sit in a corner waiting for life to improve. It moves. It steps forward. It begins to dig wells in the desert, believing that rain is coming. That is what it means to be ready, not simply to hope, but to act in alignment with that hope. Many people miss the restoration God has for them, not because He did not send it, but because they were not in a posture to receive it. A heart that is closed in fear cannot hold new joy. A spirit cluttered with bitterness has no room for peace. Preparation is a process of clearing the inner space, making room for the good things God desires to give. And this process is rarely dramatic, it is quiet. It involves discipline, humility, self-examination, and surrender. It is saying, I don't see the answer yet, but I will live as though it's on the way. One of the most remarkable aspects of preparation is that it changes you before it changes your situation. You may begin preparing for a restored relationship, a calling, a breakthrough, but along the way, you find that the deeper work is being done within. You become stronger, more patient, more compassionate. You discover that God is not only preparing the blessing for you, He is preparing you for the blessing. If the fulfillment came too soon, you might not be able to carry it. If the door opened too early, you might walk through it with the wrong heart. So preparation becomes both an act of faith and an act of mercy. There is also a cost to preparation. It means letting go of despair even when despair feels justified. It means forgiving even when bitterness feels easier. It means choosing gratitude in the absence of visible change. These are not light tasks. They require courage, the kind of courage that lives quietly behind closed doors, in the hidden places where no one applauds. But every small act of preparation is a seed of faith. Every moment you choose trust over fear, peace over anxiety, surrender over control, you are saying to God, I believe you will restore, and I will be ready. Readiness also requires discernment. It means listening carefully for God's voice so you don't prepare in the wrong way or for the wrong thing. The world may tell you to hustle, to climb, to push ahead with your own plans. But divine preparation is different. It is slower, deeper, and more rooted in trust than ambition. It may require stepping back instead of forward, resting instead of striving, serving instead of seeking recognition. Being ready is not about having everything figured out. It is about being willing to follow God's lead, even when the path doesn't look like the one you would have chosen. Perhaps the hardest part of preparation is continuing when nothing seems to be happening. When the days stretch long and the promise feels distant, it is tempting to stop, to sit down in weariness, to abandon the tools and leave the field. But it is often in those very moments when the soul is tired and the silence is heavy that the roots grow deepest. The act of continuing to prepare, even in the quiet, becomes a testimony to your trust. It becomes worship. To prepare is to hope with your hands, not just your heart. It is to plant when the sky is dry. It is to clean the guest room even when no one has sent word they are coming. And it is to know, with quiet confidence, that when restoration comes, and you will not be caught off guard, because you were already living in expectation. When God restores, He does not merely return what was lost in the same form. His way is not to simply rewind time and put things back where they were. He does not deal in replicas or replacements, he deals in resurrection. And resurrection is always more than restoration. It is life out of death, beauty from ashes, and purpose born from pain. This means that when God gives back, he gives differently. He gives better. Not always in the way we expected, but always in a way that is richer, fuller, and deeper than we could have imagined. There is a tendency in the human heart to measure restoration by sameness. We want things to be as they were. If we lost time, we want that time back. If a relationship broke, we want it to look exactly as it did before the fracture. If a dream died, we want it revived in its original form. But God rarely operates by giving us back what we once had. He gives us what we did not know we needed. He sees from a higher place. He understands what we could not have understood in our earlier longing. And so his restoration is not a return, it is a transformation. Often what God gives in return is shaped by what we endured. If the years were marked by silence, he may return to us a voice, one that carries weight and wisdom because it was born in suffering. If we walk through seasons of rejection, he may gift us with a sense of belonging that cannot be shaken, because it was built not on approval, but on his unchanging love. What we receive is not compensation, it is fulfillment. It is not just recovery, it is recreation. The old soil is not merely dusted off, it is plowed, renewed, and planted with better seed. God is never wasteful, even with our pain. The tears you shed in the dark places were not forgotten. They were stored, seen, and even counted. Scripture tells us he keeps our tears in a bottle, as though to say nothing is lost. And if nothing is lost, then everything is available for redemption. This does not mean he will always return things in the same shape or with the same faces. A lost friendship may not be rekindled, but it may be replaced by a deeper community you never would have found without that loss. A dream left behind may not be restored in name or setting, but its essence, the deep longing it represented, may be fulfilled in a way more aligned with your true calling. There is also a mystery in how God returns joy. It doesn't always come in large waves. It may arrive in fragments, in quiet moments that slowly begin to rebuild your sense of wonder. A smile where once there was only sorrow. Laughter after a long stretch of silence. A sunrise that moves you in a way it never did before. Restoration is sometimes emotional, sometimes relational, sometimes spiritual, but it always touches the soul in places that were once broken, and it is in those places that God builds a new foundation. What is profound about God's return is that it often includes a commission. When you've been through suffering and loss, and he restores you, he does not do so merely for your comfort. He often sends you back into the world, not as who you were, but as someone who carries light. He makes your healing a story, your scars a testimony. Your life becomes proof that God does not just mend, he makes new. And so, the blessing he returns is not only for you, it is meant to flow through you to others who are still waiting for their dawn. This is why the blessing God gives in return is so often unexpected. It may look smaller, but it is deeper. It may be quieter, but it carries more weight. It may not match what you asked for, but it will always be what your soul most needed. Because his restoration is not about giving back what time or people or circumstances took from you. It is about revealing what could only have been discovered through the loss, through the waiting, through the wilderness. What is returned is never just the old thing, it is the old thing made new, refined, resurrected, and full of glory. When restoration finally comes, it rarely looks the way we imagined. We may have spent years praying for it, dreaming of it, shaping its details in our minds. We may have envisioned specific outcomes, precise timings, and particular people being involved. But God, in his wisdom, often answers the deep cry of our hearts in ways that break the mold of our expectations. His response is not random, it is purposeful. He does not just give what we wanted, he gives what is right, what is lasting, and what will not destroy us once we hold it. There is a great danger in becoming so attached to a specific form of blessing that we miss the real thing when it comes. God might restore joy, but not through the relationship we thought He would heal. He might restore purpose, but not in the career we once believed was our destiny. He might return the sense of peace we lost, but not in the same house, not with the same surroundings, not in the same way. When our hearts are tethered to a single version of the answer, we risk growing blind to the unexpected beauty of the one God chooses to give. It takes humility to receive what we did not anticipate. There's a dying to our own picture, a letting go of our blueprint. And that's difficult. It feels like loss all over again, even when what we're being offered is good. Because the heart has to mourn not just what was taken, but also what we imagined would be. That imagined outcome becomes its own idol, and letting it go can feel like betrayal to our own hope. But real faith is not clinging to the outcome, it is clinging to the one who decides what that outcome will be. It is believing that even if the package looks different, the gift is still good. This is where trust deepens. Not the surface-level kind of trust that only holds when things go according to plan, but the gritty, tested kind that still says yes to God when the path looks unfamiliar. When He gives you something better, but it's not what you asked for, will you recognize it? Will you thank Him for it? Will you step into it open hands, even if your heart still aches for what could have been? The mature soul learns to see the divine fingerprint, even on the unfamiliar blessing. Sometimes the restoration isn't a thing, it's a person you've become. You may have been asking for years to get something back, and all the while God was giving you back yourself. Not the broken, bitter version of you that was formed by loss, but the true version of you, the one who knows joy without needing constant reassurance, who knows peace that doesn't depend on perfect circumstances, who knows how to walk with others through their pain because you've walked through your own. This, too, is restoration. Perhaps it is the highest kind. There is also the joy of being surprised by God. When He restores, He often includes touches of grace that no one asked for, small details, moments of kindness, unexpected beauty, things that could have only come from a heart that knows you intimately. You may have asked for daily bread, and He includes honey. You may have asked to get through the storm, and He sends a rainbow afterward. These little touches reveal not only His power, but His gentleness. They whisper, "I see you. I know what you longed for. I know what you couldn't put into words." To embrace the restoration God brings, you must remain open to being surprised, open to releasing old dreams, open to receiving something new. You must be willing to admit that He knows better than you do what will actually restore you. Because sometimes what we think we need would not heal us, it would only deepen the wound. Sometimes the thing we are desperate to reclaim is the very thing that God in love has allowed to be removed so He could give us something purer, safer, and more enduring. When restoration comes in this unexpected form, it changes the way we relate to the future. We become less attached to controlling it, more willing to trust the timing and method of a God who never disappoints in the long run. We become more surrendered, more watchful, more grateful. And we begin to understand that the promise of restoration was never about going back. It was always about going forward into something deeper, truer, and far more beautiful than anything we could have built on our own. So then, what have we seen? That the years we thought were lost are not beyond God's reach. That the silence was not absence. That the breaking was not the end. In every delay, in every detour, in every place we wept over what could have been, God was already at work quietly, patiently, faithfully. Restoration is not just about giving back what was taken, but about giving us back to ourselves, realigned to Him. Not in the shape of what we once had, but in the shape of who we have become through the fire and the waiting. Be ready not just to receive, but to recognize. Because when God restores, He doesn't simply return what was, He redeems it. He makes it new. He gives it meaning. The years the locust devoured were not wasted. They were planted. And now, in His time, they will bloom not in the way you imagined, but in the way only a perfect Father could design. Wait with hope. Prepare with faith. Live as one who knows nothing surrendered to God is ever truly lost. The restoration is coming. Be ready.